and the awkward interaction or lack of interaction between President Trump and his predecessors, who he has repeatedly attacked. We are also keeping a very close eye on the stock markets at this hour. U.S. stock futures in the red. The Dow down about 400 points, targeted to open down about 400 points. The overseas markets, as you can see, they're also falling. We're going to take a closer look, show you what is fueling this sell-off around the world.
So joining us now, political anchor for Spectrum News, Errol Lewis, CNN counterterror analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official Phil Mudd, and impeachment attorney Ross Garber. Don't let the title fool you. We don't necessarily think his services will be needed. At least not today. Phil Mudd, I'm going to
got the guilty plea in Alexandria Courthouse. That was about money. A lot of the conversation about Michael Cohen is about money. The question I want to know is the question everybody has from day one. Manafort was at the center of the campaign when there are allegations that maybe there was some sort of contact and maybe cooperation with WikiLeaks. A, is that correct? And B, the most significant question, is he lying not about money, which he's already been convicted on, but lying to protect any inappropriate interaction with not Russians, but maybe people like WikiLeaks who had data that was of value to the campaign?
And it'll be interesting to see how much of that we can get out of this memo, too, based on what we saw, how much was redacted, obviously, in the Flynn filing. In terms of what we did learn, though, from the Flynn filing, you said if you were Donald Trump's attorney, that this would cause you great concern, Ross.
Yes, I've spent a couple of decades as a defense lawyer, and one of the things I don't like is surprises. I try to know what's going on. I try to know the facts. That's what good defense lawyers try to do. And when I looked at the Flynn filing, one of the things that concerned me, it would concern me if I were the president's lawyers, is how much is still unknown, how much is clear they don't know, and how potentially significant it all is. Yeah.
Now, that's fascinating. And specifically speaking, when you hear there are 3 investigations going on at once, is that something that jumped out to you?
Yeah, 3 investigations going on at once, including one, you showed all the redactions, including one where we don't even know where the investigation's, happening. We don't know who it's targeting, and we don't even know what it's about. And I think there's a fair chance that the president's lawyers don't know either.
Errol, you look at all of this, and you note, I think correctly, Michael Flynn was a key player here. He was the national security advisor, and there were a whole lot of warnings about Michael Flynn from a lot of people.
That's right.
To President Trump.
Including the sitting president of the United States at the time, right? President Obama says, don't hire him. Don't do this. I've already sort of removed him from responsibility. It turns out fairly early on, you learn that there are these probes of his activities. For Trump to have gone ahead and placed him in, these are just guesses and these are clues. But the reality is, if he one of the first things that he did that in fact triggered the Mueller investigation was to go to the FBI director, James Comey, and say, hey, can you let him go? Can you leave him alone? Of all of the things that Donald Trump has tweeted about and expressed opinions about, he talks about Manafort, and he talks about Cohen, and he talks about Roger Stone, and he talks about everybody involved in this. He talks about Mueller. He has said nothing about Michael Flynn. And that also, I think, is really very telling. I mean, against the direct advice, publicized advice of the president, he elevates him to a very high security position. He then tries to, really sort of skirt the law, walking right up to the edge of obstruction by telling James Comey, hey, can you let him go? And then after that, the president, who wants to talk about everything, says nothing about Michael Flynn. It's really, really sort of telling, I think.
It is fascinating. It's one of those moments where you think about all the stuff that isn't being said that really tells you so much. And I see you smiling about it, Phil. And then that's not the only point either. I mean, there's so much here that is not said. We do know a fair amount at this point, right? We know about Flynn. We know a little bit about Manafort. We're obviously waiting to see what the details are, how much of them we'll get tomorrow. We know about Cohen. It's interesting, though, to look at who now is playing along. And if you look at Cohen and if you look at Flynn and then you look at Manafort, there's a distinct difference.
There is. And I think you're talking about we know a lot. I actually don't think we do know a lot. If you look at the number of times that Flynn spoke with the special counsel, if I recollect, it's 19 times. If you look at Don McGahn's interviews, if you look at the interviews with Steve Bannon, if you look at the fact that we still don't know the nature of interactions on the core issue of Russia and whether the campaign receives something of value of WikiLeaks. We know these people are cooperating. We know there are documents potentially related to Russia in the documents that were taken from Michael Cohen. We're missing more than 50% of the story. What happened with Russia? And I suspect the special counsel knows already.
And that's just on the Russia front. I mean, if you think about how sprawling this has become, we're looking at, Russian interference, we're looking at transition team issues, we're looking at campaign finance issues with Michael Cohen, we're looking at potential obstruction issues, and now the special counsel, with Michael Cohen, has his sort of nose under the tent of the Trump businesses. This thing has gotten very sprawling, and Phil is right. I mean, there is so much we don't know.
So on Paul Manafort specifically, and you can provide us unique insight here. What's unusual tomorrow, I understand what a sentencing document, a sentencing memo is, but tomorrow it's this unique thing where they're going to tell a judge what Paul Manafort has been lying about is part of his cooperation from a plea deal.
Yeah, well, it's what the government thinks that Paul Manafort is lying about. Paul Manafort's lawyers say he has not been lying, and it's going to be up to the judge to decide. And I think that's going to be an important point. And we don't know why Paul Manafort's lawyers say he's not lying. Sometimes that argument is made because the lawyers believe there was just an honest lapse of recollection, a memory issue. Sometimes they believe that some other witness is lying and the prosecutors believe them instead. There could be a whole range of things.
Can I ask you one mop-up question while we have you here? We don't often have an impeachment lawyer on the set with us. On the Paul Manafort issue, people noted how unusual it was for someone who had already pleaded guilty to be sharing information with someone else's team who may be a subject in this investigation. How unusual is that? Did that set off alarm bells for you?
Yeah, well, and to be clear, I have handled a lot of impeachments, but day to day I represent public officials and government officials and campaigns and lots of these.
We're not saying you're the Grim Reaper, right?
No, fair enough. So the answer is it is relatively unusual, but it's not unprecedented. And I think what